I will, of course, I cannot deal with sports all over. There's very much to it. But until recently, there weren't that many studies, especially in the field of criminology, that actually paid any attention to sports as an interesting area. There were researches, as I said, a lot of research is being done in the area of drugs. It's more, well, the illegal substances, cocaine, heroin, hemp, you name it. So, but talking about drugs in the area of sports, well, until recently, when we've had, of course, a number of serious incidents, or the question is whether they are incidents, whether it's endemic, you could say, when you talk about doping, and not only, again, it's linked here on the picture in relation to cycling, but nowadays we hear a lot about athletics, the whole recent scandal in relation to Russian athletes in particular, but also athletes from Kenya and other athletes that are, at least there are serious suspicions in relation to doping. It's a huge market. In relation to cycling, by the way, this weekend there were again new rumors about new forms of doping, not taking substances, but doing something with your bicycle. So forms of mechanical doping, that the way in fact you're not riding a bike but a kind of a moped, there's a kind of motor inside of it, hidden of course, seriously concealed. So you see all kinds of, well, forms of influencing performances. Match fixing, another, I would say, especially in relation to professional football, that we know that a number of games nowadays have seriously been distorted, been influenced by corruption practices. So we've had a number of those issues in several countries. Less attention has been paid so far, but it is increasingly being done recently in relation to human trafficking, and especially the trading of players, young, well, you see the picture here, young players coming from South America, Africa, who are somehow being persuaded to come to Europe or to other countries, and well, in a number of ways you can actually say they are being trafficked here, and at least, well, they have the feeling, yes, I can make a career in professional football, but 99% of those players, young players, will never succeed. And what happens next? Those are practices still, as I said, a bit ignored, neglected by criminology. There is some investigative journalism that pays attention to those incidents, to those forms of misconduct. But generally speaking, there is not that much available. The same goes, I would say, to the financing of sport clubs, financing of also, if you look at transfers of players, and I will pay some more attention to that aspect today. Last but not least, of course, in this slide, there is the aspect of, and this is another form of corruption, I would say, the match fixing. Of course, there is corruption involved in that aspect as well. But if you look at the huge incident and the huge investigation that is going on nowadays in relation to FIFA, what happened to Blatter, and of course that's partly related to, well, the appointment, to the decision which country will be able to organize the next World Championship, and there's a lot of money at stake. And it's also about, of course, marketing rights, there's a lot about television rights, you name it. So there's huge money, huge amounts of money are involved. And it seems to be that for a criminologist, this is not only interesting to look upon at what the individuals have been doing, what Blatter has been doing, or his associates, but also how it could have happened that it has lasted for such a long time, that a lot of people were aware of it, but anyway, but until recently that nobody actually paid attention to it. There were people who actually have claimed for quite a long time that things were seriously wrong within FIFA, but they were never taken seriously. And for me as a criminologist, not only in relation to sports, but also in relation to other forms of misconduct, that is intriguing. I think there are some students here from international business, and it's intriguing to look at some serious scandals around the world, not related to sports, but a serious case of, Enron. I know that Andrew Fastow, he will be here next month, former CFO of Enron, major company, and all the Major players within the company were incarcerated for years after a serious fraud scandal, but that had lasted for a very, very long time. Bernie Madoff's case in the US, the Ponzi scheme, interesting for criminologists. Not only the person Bernie Madoff is fascinating, you can look at that from a, more at a micro perspective, and as a criminologist, of course, we are interested in human behavior. So we are looking at what has actually triggered Madoff to do whatever he did, but he had been doing it for 20 years, mind you. And there were so many people surrounding him, and so many people actually had a feeling what he's doing, it's too good to be true. And there were some people actually saying what he was promising to new clients, people said, you can hardly believe it. But he was a star, he was a superstar. And he belonged to the establishment, and everybody wanted to belong to the inner circle of Bernie Madoff. He was an executive at the NASDAQ, he was a big player. So the problem is, of course, and the same goes into cycling. If you look, for instance, at Lance Armstrong, strong personality. Well, if you mix up that, and one of the players that actually can control his environment, and both Madoff in the financial world and Lance Armstrong were capable of at least controlling it, to come up with a wall of silence. For a very long time, people did not dare to speak out, because if you did, it would have had serious consequences for you. You could have lost your job, end of your career. So nobody actually dared to come out and speak out. And that is fascinating for criminologists as well, so not only to study actual individual behavior, but also looking at what holds people back. Why do not people report this kind of thing if they are aware of it? One of the things we will address, by the way, today as well. But as I said, I cannot deal with everything. There are so many new interesting things to study. By the way, within our department, this is one of the areas we are interested in. We have the feeling, because it's more or less, it's a linkage somehow between more forms of corporate crime and even organized crime. And as I said, it's interesting to study it, so we are more looking into the financing of sports clubs, and I will tell you a little bit later on. I start with, well, of course, the picture is a bit of a joke, although now Michel Platini, he's in serious problem. It should have said, we care about football. This is a slogan of UEFA, European Association, and this is, of course, the joke, we care about money, because this was the allegation that UEFA and FIFA were more interested in, well, acquiring income, especially, and a lot of money, rather than looking at, well, what's going on in this specific area. Although you might say what UEFA has introduced a couple of years ago, they introduced a system which they refer to as financial fair play. So it seems to be, if you listen to that you think, okay, so they are interested in, well, stability of the market as such. They are interested at least also in integrity, because this is basically about integrity, what's going on there. So, but interestingly enough, if you study it, and I don't know whether you can actually read it from the back, but if you look at the objectives, then you will see that it is about more discipline, rationality. It's about decrease of pressure on salaries and transfer fees. It's about encouraging clubs to compete within their revenues. That's the most important part. There are clubs with huge, enormous debts. Keep in mind already that, for instance, still, which is a crazy thing, by the way, if you start thinking about it, the major clubs nowadays in Spain are still the two clubs from Madrid and Barcelona. They are top of the list, but also in relation to the debts they have. Real Madrid still has a debt of more than 500 million to the Spanish banks, which is a crazy thing, by the way, because, well, more or less, we saved the bank during the financial crisis, the Spanish banks, and they are, well, there was this huge club in Madrid that owes a lot of money to the Spanish banks, and in fact, well, it seems to be at least that those banks, well, more or less were supported by the northern countries actually to survive during the financial crisis. But the system says financial fair play is, well, we will look upon, we will scrutinize exactly what you're doing in a financial way, and we do not allow you anymore to make that your debts will increase. So it should be balanced somehow. We look at the income, we look at expenditure. It should be more balanced than in the future. But they don't look back historically, meaning that Real Madrid or Barcelona, another major club that has hundreds of millions of debts, but they are not forced to at least sanitize their finances. They are at least what's being referred to as they have to compete within their revenues, so it should be more balanced. Questionable, by the way, whether they have succeeded so far. Well, the youth sector, the protected long-term viability of European club football, you name it, but nowhere is mentioned, well, we should do something about investments of a dubious origin. It never is the relation, the association being made with money laundering activities. And that is intriguing because the market as such, as I will explain, is so very much crime conducive and for so vulnerable in that respect for all kinds of forms of money laundering activity that it is hard to imagine why UEFA, and the same goes by the way for the local associations in different countries, hardly do anything about that. So they are not interested at all where the money is coming from, which is crazy, by the way. Some clubs, as we know, have been taken over. If you look at the major clubs in the United Kingdom, in the English competition, but even so in this country and in Belgium, some of those clubs are being owned, controlled by tycoons, people who actually come in with a lot of money, which is a bit odd because we have introduced all kinds of anti-money laundering systems. We want banks to report suspicious transactions. Even if you buy a very expensive car and you want to pay the car in cash, there will be a report to the financial intelligence unit of your country. We have introduced all kinds of systems, anti-money laundering systems, to make the markets more transparent. As I said, in the car industry, in antiques even. So you don't, but sports seems to be somehow being ignored, neglected. People tend to look the other way, which is, I would say, fascinating and, well, to a certain extent, hardly to understand. Which brings me to the next section, of course. What do we actually mean by when we introduce the term money laundering? And within criminology, of course, there's a huge debate about what is the actual definition you may use for your research, and what do we actually consider to be money laundering. And here it's interesting because one of the questions we also raise is how does crime, or the concept of crime, develop over time? What we once called money laundering is nowadays, our perception of what money laundering actually is has changed in a period of 30 to 40 years. As is mentioned here, when we listen to the language as well, it's always interesting to listen to what actually is being used for kind of language. The color black is also associated with something which is, well, not correct. So black money was introduced, but it was strongly associated in the 70s and 80s, at least in Europe, with tax evasion and tax avoidance. At the time, you would not hear anywhere, in northwestern Europe at least, nobody was talking about organized crime. Organized crime virtually did not exist, which is strange. Well, it did exist, of course, and we saw all kinds of manifestations. But when we talked about organized crime, we talked about Italy, we talked about Sicily in particular, and we talked about the US. And we all watched the beautiful movies, The Godfather, part 1, 2 and 3. We loved it, and we had a feeling, well, this is something of another planet. But nobody at the time was as such talking about money laundering in relation to this form of activity, at least in this region. Again, in some other countries it was different. This slowly changed in the 90s, when there was suddenly, when we talked about money laundering and doing so, there was a need. It was particularly related with drugs trafficking. Because when we talk about organized crime, 90% of the crimes we're talking about are drug related somehow. Slowly, after the 9/11 attacks, you hear the term money laundering and going after the money, follow the money. There's even a television series nowadays with the same name. It's related to all forms of crime, including terrorism. So nowadays we are increasingly aware, we have become aware, that we could by looking into the finances of organizations, it may help us to know more about structures of terrorist organizations. The fascinating thing is that money laundering, when you actually start thinking about it, what's going on, and I will tell you a little bit more about it later, that you actually are somewhere on the crossroad where different forms of criminals meet. Because in the end, what money laundering entails, you have earned a profit in an illegitimate way. So you can think about any kind of crime, and originally, as I said, you basically thought about drugs, but you can think of any form of crime which makes a profit, and okay, you want to, if you have the profit, you want to do something with it. So you want to enjoy it. And most criminals do. They spend it on the spot, and they spend a lot of money. But some of them have a luxury position because they have earned so much money, they have to do something extra. So you can go out and spend 250,000 euro a weekend, which some people do. I once tried to imagine what you have to do to spend 250,000 euros a weekend, but you can do it, it's manageable. But stop thinking about it, you have to do a lot. So you can do this kind of thing, and you can buy jewelry for your girlfriend, you can do a lot. And you can buy fancy cars, you name it, but in the end some of them have a luxury position, they have more or less, they have too much money. So the problem is, of course, you cannot leave it somewhere, you have to do it, you want to invest it somehow. So in the end, it means that you need a kind of a construction that you actually can invest the money you have. But of course, you are aware of the fact that no longer it's being ignored, the origins of the money. There was a time, and it's not that long ago, I would say it's about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that you actually could walk into a bank here with a huge bag of money, cash money, that you would give it to the local, to the people sitting behind the desk, that it would give you a glass of champagne and a cigar, and that they started counting the money and put it on the bank account, no problem, no questions asked whatsoever. But that period has changed, so we have to come up with a solution, because going to a bank nowadays with a lot of cash money is suspicious in the first place. So we have to do something. And we're not talking about drug traffickers alone, because people involved in huge frauds or whatever, tax frauds or other types of frauds, also have in the end, the same problem. It's a luxury problem. You want to enjoy the money, you want to stash it somewhere in a safe place, and if you need it, that you can actually go for it and use it. That's the essential thing. Money laundering and money channeling is sometimes a bit confused, in the sense that you could say, well, I'll bring the money from A to B. Suppose that we would live in an era, let's say 30 to 40 years ago, nobody actually gave a damn where the money was coming from. So you could easily walk into any bank, any country, you could bring the money, they would count it for you and put it on the bank account. There was no control. I would say in that era, in that period of time, there was hardly any money laundering. You weren't changing the money, the color of the money as such. What you did was you had cash money, you brought it to a bank, and it was taken care of. So money channeling still happens, that you bring money from A to B. There are still people walking around, you can hardly imagine it, because we all pay everything with our cards and we hardly use any cash money anymore. But if you go to an average custom and excise official working at an airport or any other, they will tell you how much cash money they confiscate on an annual basis. It's enormous. So there are still curious mules walking around with a lot of cash. And especially that is because some people have a problem, especially people who are in a specific form of crime activity where the actual way that the transactions are being paid, that cash is still the most popular way of paying the transaction, that they may have serious problems. So they are walking around with a lot of cash money. But of course, you can still bring it to another country where you know that nobody will actually start nasty questions. So at the moment, as long as you are certain that you bring your money to a place where you know, okay, I can bring it over there, nobody will start asking any questions. I put it on a bank account, and then you can start working. Because the moment you have your money on a bank account, you can start playing with it. You could do whatever you want. But the first part is always the most difficult one. So channeling, bringing money from A to B still happens, but to call it money laundering is a bit different. And here you see the difference in criminology, by the way. The first definition is the wider one, and it more or less includes money channeling. It says, well, the more that you move the money, it doesn't matter what you do with it, you just move it, you can already call it a form of money laundering. But other scholars, and also when you look at legislation, at the law, you will find that most definitions are a bit more strict. So what they presume is that you want to conceal or to disguise the origin, the true nature, and the source, the location, disposition, you see it here. So you want to hide something. You do not want to be open about the origins of the money that you owe. The moment that people will start asking questions, they come to you and they tell me, hey, where's that million coming from? That I have a good explanation. And it's not a very good explanation to say, yes, my uncle died, he was living in Italy, and I inherited a lot of money. I don't think that's a very convincing story nowadays. So you have to come up with something better. And you have to come up with something to at least to say, well, anyway, it seems to be logical, or it seems to be persuasive, convincing, that you have been involved in all kinds of legitimate constructions and that you earned your money in a legitimate way. This is important to remember. The moment we actually started paying attention to money laundering, we created also, and it was the beginning of the 90s, and again, strictly related at the time to organized crime, drug crime in particular, we created the FATF, and that's the Financial Action Task Force of the G20, the most powerful economic countries around the world. So they have a Financial Action Task Force, and it's related to organized crime and terrorism. So what they have been doing, they have come up with all kinds of recommendations to improve all kinds of monitoring systems and to prevent criminals from entering the system. And they of course tried to estimate how much money is around, how much black money, drug-related money is around, and always say that is a tricky business, because this is also always based upon all kinds of analysis, mostly economic analysis, based upon a number of assumptions, like the IMF assumption, that they say between 2 and 5% of the world's gross domestic product is a form of money laundering. I would say it's a bit higher at the moment, according to their estimates. There was a third one of an economist, Brigitte Unger. She came with the estimation a couple of years ago that at an annual basis there is 18 billion euros laundered in the Netherlands only. So there are estimations also where they try to look at specific countries and to find out how much money is being laundered in one specific country. I will not go into detail why those are what I refer to here as estimates in fork, which I mean, with this term I mean they are highly unreliable. Every estimation, I would say, because if you start actually looking into it, what they try to estimate, The first question will be, if you think about the amount of money, to take Unger's estimation as a starting point, 18 billion in the Netherlands, what are you actually talking about? Are you talking about the profits made by criminals who are involved in all kinds of criminal activity in the Netherlands? Is that the number, is that the amount of money you're interested in? Because we all know that there are many people, the Netherlands is being it's a gateway to Europe in many respects. Okay, there's a lot of crime being committed, a lot of transit crime coming in, being committed in the Netherlands, all the import of drugs, but much of the drugs is going to other countries. So the question already begins, how to estimate the profits made by the criminals. And if you actually can do that, the second question is, does the profit, the turnover, does it actually stay in the Netherlands? Because you can imagine, well, some people will enjoy the money here, many of them will send it probably abroad. They will use a loop. So they may send it abroad and it may return in the Netherlands in another way. But many of them, well, suppose that there are, of course, a lot of criminals with various backgrounds in the Netherlands and nationalities. So it may well be that they send their money, their illegally obtained profits, that they send them this money to their home countries. So it will not stay in the Netherlands. And on the other hand, the Netherlands is also a very intriguing place. It's a financial paradise for a number of reasons. For a lot of people like to invest in the Netherlands for a number of reasons. Take rock groups like U2 and the Rolling Stones. They like, well, it's no coincidence that they actually are using Amsterdam as a financial center in relation to intellectual property rights, what they have to pay, or they don't have to pay any taxes in that respect. So the system as such welcomes all kinds of investors as well. So a lot of foreign people are investing in the Netherlands. They are not living here, but they are investing a lot of money in real estate, for instance. We are worried about the state of affairs in our real estate world in the Netherlands because some people claim it's being infected by organized crime. Organized criminals buy real estate to a large extent, and yes, a number of them do. So they are involved in all kinds of dubious transactions in real estate. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that 60 to 70% of all investments in real estate in the Netherlands is of foreign origin. So it's coming from abroad. And here we have already a problem. Again, if you want to estimate then how much money is being laundered in this country, what are you actually looking at? And Unger is not clear in that respect because she's mixing up a lot of things at the same time. She's looking at crimes that are being committed in the country, assuming that all the money that is being obtained stays here, which is, I would say, very, very dubious. At the same time, she's ignoring the huge amounts of money that are coming in another way. So we have a number here which is being used because the moment, as an academic, the moment you produce a figure, you come up with 18 billion, you are sure that everyone will follow and everyone will start. This figure was presented, I would say, 10 years ago. But still, if you call the Ministry of Finance here and ask them about money laundering, after 2 sentences they will start about 18 billion laundered annually. So it's being repeated all the time, but it's in many respects very, very unreliable. And some people even claim, well, why do we bother in the first place? Because you could say, listen, we are now saints and we do not have an immaculate society which is not touched upon, so why bother? And listen, if you are able to attract a lot of money, investors, we do not mind where the money is coming from. It's good. Local economy is flourishing. It's the same excuse that you hear sometimes when it comes down to corruption in third world countries, that companies actually claim, yes, but what we're doing, okay, first of all we had to do it, because if we didn't do it, our competitors would have done it. And in order to get involved in transactions in this specific country, well, it's inevitable, you have to bribe people. But moreover, then the legitimization is always, well, okay, but maybe it's not so bad for local economy, because in the end we invest a lot of money there, so that's good for, they may profit as well, indirectly. So this is a classic one that people say, well, due to the investments that local economies may be flourishing. At the same time, people agree upon the fact, well, it may lead to serious distortion of economies, to unfair competition, at least less transparency. It will put a lot of pressure on a lot of people within corporations, but also civil servants, professionals. Think about all the consultants, financial advisors, lawyers, notaries public. The moment that branches are completely dominated by money laundering activities, it may lead to serious, well, a decrease in the level of integrity within many, many professions. And it may lead to crime, may attract other forms of crime, it may lead to intimidating behavior, to more violence. In the end, it may destabilize economies and even politics. Because in the end, if it's, and this is the worrying aspect, for instance in Italy, this was not only about investing money, but this was also about controlling economy and in the end also the political system. And that is of course a very worrying aspect of money laundering, that you can actually influence what's going on in regular society. In the general literature in relation to money laundering, you will see a number of stages. And it doesn't mean that every scheme is as sophisticated as and goes through all those stages, but this is the classic idea, and it's about you have money available. And although it's not only about drugs is a very simple example, it always helps us a little bit, because as you might know, buying drugs on the streets or in a coffee shop, most people pay cash. So there's a lot, this is one of the, well, few branches I would still say, where there are so many cash transactions. So there is a cash problem in the end, because at the moment that everyone is paying with small amounts of cash, you have to do something with the money. This is the first stage you have to go through, at least, especially in this area, you have to put it somehow in a bank account. And as I said previously, that has become, at least in most Western countries, and due to all kinds of treaties and adaptations in legislation, it has become increasingly complex to go to banks or invest money directly and bring it. So to place the money somehow, you need some tricks. This has led, for instance, although it's not it's not a causal relation, I would say, but what you see nowadays is that increasingly all forms of informal value transfer systems or forms of underground banking are being used. So people start to avoid the regular financial centers. You have a lot of money. What you do is, let's assume I'm a drug trafficker. I have a problem because I have 1 million in cash. I've stashed it somewhere, and that's a tricky business. First of all, I cannot do anything with it. I cannot go to a bank, to a regular bank. It's tricky because I may be robbed. It's quite risky if people know about that, if my competitors know about it. So I have to do something. And then I know somebody who's running a pizza shop or a greengrocer. And he may be of help to me. So I go to him, I walk into the kitchen, I tell him, this is my bag of 1 million, you take care of it. I want you to put it on a bank account somewhere in Pakistan. And the moment we have the money on a bank account in Pakistan, we start playing. And I can transfer it around the world. But I need assistance, I need people who can help me with that. And then you end up in all kinds of systems like Hawala banking. Vaccine, you have different systems, by the way, and again, they were not created because of this, or because there were all kinds of people with serious crime problems. No, they go back centuries. Because historically, this is how people, and still, those systems are being used by migrants who work in the western part of the world, who do not trust the regular banks, who know some friends, not always from the same ethnic community, but they go there and say, listen, I want to send some money home, bring it to my parents, can you take care of it? Yes, I can. You have to pay a fee, no problem whatsoever. But those systems are being abused as well, and they can be quite helpful in relation to placing the money. And as I said, the moment then starts that and that's the second stage, the layering stage, that you're gonna play with the money And first of all, you will send it around the world to many accounts of different corporations. This is where offshore, by the way, comes into the picture very strongly. So you can link up a lot of companies you control somehow economically, and of course you disguise yourself, you conceal that you are the one who actually control the business, because you have so many corporations and they are linked up to one another, and you as an individual, you will not be recognized immediately as the ultimate beneficial owner. So there will be others in this whole long chain who will be recognized. So you start mixing up illegitimate funds with legitimate funds. So the moment you start doing that and playing with the money and sending it around, using all kinds of false invoices, doing whatever you can, but what you want to create in the end, and this is also linked up with the justification phase, is that what you want to in the end achieve is that people actually believe that the money you owe, that those corporations that you have there, that it has a legitimate origin, that it's not earned by crime. So you start playing with it, so you make it very difficult for all the authorities to trace it back. That's the general idea. Because in the end, and that's the last stage, the integration phase, you actually want to do something with it. So the moment you want to buy real estate, you need a loan, you go to a bank for a mortgage whatsoever. So you need at least to explain to the bank what is your profession, can you give me anything? At least I will not grant you a mortgage if we cannot see any regular income, if we do not see that you are a professional businessman. So you have to be convincing in that respect. If you want to play with the money and in the end you invest it, you have to come up with all kinds of, and this is the whole system. And again, it's not sophisticated in all respects, some do it rather clumsy, but you will find systems being used and some do it in a very sophisticated way, and it's very complex to unravel. Here we are, suddenly in the Caribbean area. This is one of the British Virgin Islands, Tortola. 23,000 people there. I could have shown a picture of the beaches as well. Looks lovely. But they have hundreds of thousands of registered offshore companies, or even millions. I haven't counted, I didn't look at the last overview, but this is one of those islands. This is they have become big players, the British Virgin Islands, to register a firm there. And again, you can do that for a number of reasons. Let's be straight in that respect, and let's actually show that you can come up with a number of legitimate reasons why it's good for your company, a legitimate company. I think for those of you who study international business and relations, that you all know about, well, you can do that for good, legitimate reasons. But on the other hand, what we see nowadays, and that is interesting, of course, with the slide on the right, what we know so far from the Panama Papers, because this recent scandal, or at least there was a lot of publicity, it's not clear yet what it actually entails. So we see a lot of names and rumors and people associated with it, but it seems to be that there are at least more people, and not only drug criminals, that actually have good reasons to conceal that they owe a lot of money. David Cameron must have had serious reasons, at least to be part. His name was mentioned in the papers, included like Lionel Messi, the football player, as well. And there are some other people. The Prime Minister of Iceland already stepped down due to the question still is, because so far it's relatively new, we have to study it, I think. So we have to be careful in that respect, because you can easily destroy reputations of people. First you have to look into it very carefully, what's actually going on. But what it actually shows, because I don't think Panama as such is not so interesting. Yes, there is a company in Panama, it's a trust company, it's a law firm that actually works, that more or less, it's more interesting to look at where the companies that appear in those Panama Papers were registered. And there you see, and I don't know whether you can read it, but the majority, that's the British. Virgin Islands. So we have a system there, it's fully legitimate. And to be honest, we have an industry here, of course, a huge industry. We have, I think only in the Netherlands, more than 100,000 people working in the financial industry, advising companies what to do next. And it's not only about committing crimes. No, it's about being clever think about risks, about when you want to invest. Again, there may be good reasons why you want to do that, why you want to use that kind of construction, but it's quite clear as well that those systems are being abused by people as well who do not have, let me put it friendly, not very good reasons to do so. At least they want something to conceal. They want at least something to hide, criminal activity or something which actually, forms of behavior which at the moment, especially after some serious financial scandals, people are quite worried about their reputation. So suddenly people start talking differently about forms of tax evasion. There was a time that many people said yes, but as long as it is not a crime, as long as you do not commit any serious form of crime and only move the money there for fiscal reasons, so you have to pay less taxes, no problem whatsoever. It seems to be, not only due to the Panama Papers, but that there is now a debate on morality. That people start thinking, yes, but it may be according to the law, but is it morally acceptable that people do, or corporations do that kind of thing? Suddenly Starbucks is in the spotlight. Suddenly Facebook has to at least explain a little bit why they are using all kinds of structures in Ireland or the Netherlands. So it seems to be at least, and I think that is one of the things after the crisis and after the scandals, and that people are quite concerned also about the fact that maybe that's due to analysis of people that they say, there seems to be a concentration of wealth, that a relatively few number of people and organizations actually control the economy, and they seem to be able to avoid paying taxes. And paying taxes has become a form of deviance. You are clumsy, you are an idiot. As long as you still pay taxes, you can find so easily the structures to help you out in order to avoid it. And somehow, it seems to be, at least when you listen to the debates on the television, that people do not accept that anymore. I don't know how long it will last, but at least it seems to be slowly a kind of a shift in the way people tend to think about it. But we have to be honest as well, and not naive, because we know we have those kind of structures there and they will never disappear. They are part of the system and they are being used by anyone. And if we look at the Caribbean area, where the British Virgin Islands are situated, you see from the 16th century onwards, and think about slavery and you name it, it was a place where, we still have in the Netherlands, by the way, and then now we're not talking about Tortola, but Curaçao and Aruba. Curaçao was a main center in the Caribbean area for slave trade. Nothing to be proud of, but it was part of where the Dutch brought the slaves from Africa to Curaçao. This is where they were traded. And the Caribbean area has a history in that respect, and some of the islands you will find, and it's not only again the drugs criminals that are laundering their money there, because for a very long time, when we were talking about Aruba or Tortola or all the other islands, the Cayman Islands, it was primarily linked with serious forms of crime, in particular drugs. But nowadays it seems to be, hey, what's going on there? All the major corporations, and we already knew that, but maybe we have been looking the other way for a very long time. Major businesses are using that. Even states, when they have something to conceal. Interesting, for instance, when you look at intelligence services, there's this famous case, for those of you who are interested in writing a master thesis in this respect. It's called, there was an old bank, the BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, owned by people by I think Saudis, were in control. And it turned out, later on, that they had well, that there were not only people banking there because they liked the form of banking because it was a form of anonymous banking. They found that many serious drug traders, drug traffickers were actually using this system, but also the police and the CIA even. Because there may be very good reasons if you have to transfer monies due to all kinds of, well, you have to keep things secret. Maybe some of you sometimes watch series like Homeland or whatsoever. Financial aspects are relevant in that respect as well. So there are reasons why people want to conceal it. The BCCI turned out to be the center where everyone turned out to be banking. The criminals, the law enforcement officials, states, everyone, prime ministers, was very intriguing to find that out. So those islands have very, well, it seems to be, we tend to separate the world into the goodies and the baddies. And as long as we can talk about the baddies and the ones who actually we know of who are involved in serious forms of violent crime, it's very easy to say let's go after them. But slowly the Panama Papers and other evidence shows us, if you look at those systems, it's not only related to serious forms of crime like drugs, it's far more complex than that. And already to say something in advance on football financing, what has been revealed as well, also in those papers, and I think more will be revealed in the future, that you see when it comes down to transfers of major players, that those constructions, offshore centers, tax havens are being used enormously. The most important transfers of the last decade, part of the transfer has been concealed. So parts of the money that we found it out, for instance, when one of the players of Barcelona, Neymar, was transferred from Brazil to Barcelona. Officially they had to pay 56 million euros. It turned out to be 95. And parts of this was concealed. There were all kinds of secret transactions. And the islands had been used, those funds had been used at least to transfer the funds and to keep it out of at least out of sight. Those are fiscal authorities and law enforcement. So, very briefly, and then we'll have a break, and then I will say something about football in general. This part I already mentioned, the second and third stage, layering and integration, because you might think, okay, how do they do that? I'll give you some very easy examples. One of them is a loan back construction. It's always interesting that sometimes people have the feeling that they have missed something, but you found out very quickly that it was the wrong place to be. But a loan back construction. So assume that you have been able to put your money on an account and you've sent it to some offshore company in Tortola that is being controlled by a trust, so nobody knows exactly who's involved, and in the end you need money. And maybe, well, very directly, again, you can go to a bank to borrow, to ask for a mortgage or for a loan, but also you can come up with all kinds of financial structures from abroad. So you can come up with a loan from a company from abroad, which you actually control yourself. So you see all kinds of, this is the loop. You bring the money abroad, you somehow disguise it, and you pretend that it's a kind of fictitious loan, because the one you're loaning from, you are the one yourself. Forms in terms of integration that you pretend, because you always have to explain to the authorities. The moment that they come to you, again, suppose that I'm the criminal and I want to launder the money, and they come to me and they say, hey, listen, we see you having a lot of money because not only you have a very fancy car and you have a very wealthy lifestyle, but you seem to invest in a lot of things. Where's the money coming from? Because officially we cannot see any profession you're involved in, so you have to come up with a good reason. And then you say, for instance, well, I'm very successful in real estate. The Amsterdam market is booming again. I'm a real estate broker. I make a lot of money there. I invest there. So that explains where my money is coming from. And if you play it very cleverly, you can do that. So again, using all kinds of constructions, pretending that you make a lot of profit, which is not officially the profit is coming from. You can play, for instance, also with fictitious turnovers. Suppose you owe a lot of hotels. You are involved in the catering industry, and you pretend that you have a full house every evening. So that to the tax authorities, that may be a problem, you have to pay extra taxes, but at least you can justify the profits you have, because you say, well, I'm very successful, we have a very successful hotel, or a series of hotels, it's a chain, so we have several of them, and it's fully booked every evening, so you legitimize, you justify that you have a lot of money. When people actually start watching, only 20% of the rooms actually is occupied. But at least you pretend that you are in business, and that you are very successful in business. Again, you have several tricks to do that. You can play with the assets. Because sometimes, and this is one of the reasons why real estate is so interesting, because it's not always clear. You have some objective indicators, but to find the real, to assess the price of real estate, what it's actually worth, the value, that is something you can play with. Same goes with art. That's why art is interesting, and the same goes with football players. Because who can actually tell you how much Ronaldo was worth, or whatever player you want to think of. So the moment you start playing with that, with the value, and you have all kinds of constructions to finance it, that may be a very interesting thing to do. If you talk about relation to structure, then the first thing that is being addressed in many studies is that it is very easy to access to, so it's a low threshold. It's very easy to access the world of football. If you have a lot of money, you can come in. You see a cartoon on the right. The majority of people here is of foreign origin, but those of you who are Dutch, you may recognize Den Haag, The Hague, ADO, and nowadays has been taken over by a Chinese investment company since a year. They're still waiting for the money, or they receive part of it. It's very strange construction. Nobody actually knows. Yes, there is a person who actually is the spokesman. He seems to be the director of the investment company, but it's not quite clear. We're not talking about huge amounts of money. It's about 10 million that has been invested in the club. And if you compare that to what has happened in Italy or Spain and England in particular, that's not a lot. But we've seen examples in many European countries in particular, where groups of people, individuals or groups, actually took over complete clubs. I will give you later on an example of what has happened in the United Kingdom in relation to a club, Birmingham City, that was taken over by Carson Young. Carson Young is at the moment incarcerated. He was convicted of six different crimes, including money laundering. But he's still controlling the club. I'll come back to that later on. So that's the English example. Downstairs you see Doyen. Doyen is interesting. It's an investment company. It's registered on Malta. And what they actually do is, and it's linked up to, again, a Dutch club, Twente. A couple of years ago they suddenly became the champion of the league here. Everybody was surprised. Suddenly they had a lot of money and they started to invest a lot of money. It turned out that this company, Doyen Sports, was actually, they had granted loans to Twente, and they were partly owning the players. So what they did was they granted loans, and more or less they became the owners of a certain percentage. So they actually controlled at what moment to what club some players should be transferred. So they were more in control of the club than the actual director of the club. And the interesting thing was that until now nobody actually knows. It's an investment company, it's being registered there. But the background of Doyen and who's actually investing there, who are the groups? Of course we know about people, we know about the corporations linked up to Doyen, we know about some individuals, who are involved in that scheme, but we still do not know where the money is actually coming from. And again, this is one of the things which makes it very complex. And I'm not accusing Dorian that they are involved in huge money laundering activity, but at the same time, if you talk about transparency, we do not know where the money is actually coming from and what the background is. This diversity of legal structures, I gave already the example before the break, and looking at the British Virgin Islands and other islands, all the offshore corporations and financial structures that are being used, very complicated networks linked up to one another. If you look at the structure of many clubs, then you will see it very hard to find out exactly where the money is coming from, how it's being spent, not only in relation because you can take out specific forms of financing in relation to players or all the marketing, what's going on in that respect. So you can of course focus on specific aspects of the financing of a football club, but in many cases you will see there is a lack of transparency. You do not know actually what's going on. So what you see at the same time is, and this is a classical thing in money laundering activity, that you come up with smoke curtains, that you conceal actually, that you want to show more, that you want to try to prevent others to see who actually is the owner, who's actually in control. You see that a lot of times, by the way, also in the world of real estate. I did research once in the red light district in Amsterdam, and one of the things was one of the worrisome aspects of real estate at the time. We're talking about the 90s now, 20 years ago, that there were allegations that organized crime, in particular the Hells Angels, had taken over economic control of the red light district. So they were actually more in control of what was going on there, who was allowed to invest, than the regular authorities in Amsterdam. So something had to be done, and what they introduced back then was what they referred to as the administrative approach, meaning that they gave the municipality all kinds of tools, means available, which is for, I would say, for people outside the Netherlands always a bit odd to listen to, because they have the feeling, yes, but you do have the police to fight crime. In the Dutch situation nowadays, this administrative approach means that you also try to tackle crime from an administrative perspective. So you give, for instance, the administration the tools to say, one of the things people are dependent upon when they want to invest money in, let's say, hotels, in catering, in restaurants, in even sex clubs, you need a license, you need a permit. So, and the municipality, Amsterdam, and here as well, by the way, Maastricht, every municipality has the right to, if they have suspicions, if they have a feeling, an indication that this license may be abused for criminal purposes, they may revoke the license or they may not give it to you. So what they started doing was looking at who's in control actually, because what they first said, well, we needed we needed a good, profound crime analysis of the area. We start crime mapping. So one of the things we tried to do was go look at, door by door. We just looked at addresses and looked at who's actually controlling this shop. And you go, and of course you have the land registry. It's open information, open source information, so you can go there and you will find a name. So you will find maybe a person or maybe a corporation. In many cases you will find it's a corporation. Okay, you start looking who's the stake, or who owns the shares of the corporation, and you find another corporation, you start looking, and then you see sometimes it's pretty difficult. So what you see on paper, you see something, at least a kind of reality that is a paper reality that is presented to you. Sometimes they use other individuals, straw men, so you see people with no criminal records who actually are being registered as the ones who are the owners of specific premises, shops or houses or whatsoever, and it turns out that they are not the economic owners, that there are secret contracts, that there are people involved, but of course officially they are not registered as such. And this makes it already quite complex, and this is just a very simple example, by the way, in Amsterdam, how they try to conceal, how to hide, and use those smoke curtains to actually, because that is again the same principle that is being used all the time. You want to stay anonymous. You do not want to attract any attention, not only from the law enforcement officials, the police and other institutions, but also the fiscal authorities. So you come up, you have good reasons to come up with other, and that's why you need a money laundering activity. So you see in the world of football as well, if you look at the different constructions, talk about transferring players, you name it, you see all kinds of constructions where it's actually not clear from the beginning who's actually in control. And you see a lot of use and abuse of corporate entities in that respect. The problem with the supervision is we do not know, and I think that's a problem in many countries. There are so many corporations, and not only domestically, because of course, if you look at the US, for instance, it's still pretty easy to open up a Delaware corporation. And suppose you start being active in this country with all those foreign companies, with all those foreign entities, you start looking into it, who's actually controlling it. We demand some transparency for the people who actually registered and who want to do business in a specific country. But in many cases, again, it's very hard to detect, and there is no, in respect to the monitoring, the surveillance of corporate vehicles, corporate entities, I would claim, not only nationally here, but also internationally, that there is a way ahead. We still have to make progress there in a number of ways. And maybe by using, who knows, we have the technical possibilities, using big data, you name it, that you start using, but of course there is a privacy element in this respect as well, that you can start combining all kinds of data, mixing it up. This is, by the way, what they are doing in Amsterdam right now, because I started giving the example. If you look at who's actually officially, according to the land registry, the owner of a specific place, you can go and start looking into other databases as well. You can go to the Chamber of Commerce, you can start asking, and suppose you have the permission, who's actually paying the taxes. So the moment you start combining all forms of data, and some forms of data are open for everyone, and some of them are more confident, so you have to come up with a kind of a system which they have, at least as part of this administrative approach, they have arranged that administrative authorities can exchange information with the police, the fiscal authorities. They can have access to all kinds of, what you could say, data that are not accessible for us. So maybe this is at least another way of looking into it. The problem is, again, you have to be careful, because the moment you start mixing up and sharing information, you have to be sure that you can protect it. There are many actors involved, of course, so this makes the networks already very complicated. I will not address them, and just giving you an overview, and it's just a list to show you how complex it is. Only if we could discuss for hours, of course, on the media, the influence of the media and the money involved in that respect. Individual investors, agents, when it comes down to the transfers, even the involvement of local governments, who actually, some of them actually also have parts of economic control of clubs, real estate proprietaries, a lot of things. We're talking, of course, about huge amounts of money. This is I just give you the example about debts. This is, by the way, a little bit older. La Liga, the debt, 2010, so that's 6 years ago. Here you see that the total debt of Real Madrid at the time, and it has not decreased since, I must add to it, is 590 million euros. Barcelona, a little less, Atletico, you name it. So we're talking about considerable cash flows. It is, of course, it has become a very big industry. And that's the same goes, of course, when you look at the problems within the International Olympic Movement, IOC. So that is, of course, you have a very, I would say, a structure which is not very transparent. You have a lot of money involved. I already referred to the intangible value of players. How actually do we know? The picture, by the way, is based upon Gareth Bale, player from Real Madrid, and about the way they were playing with the value in his case. And of course we have to take it into account, and this is because so far we have only been discussing the richer clubs who can actually afford this kind of thing and who attract tycoons and who are controlled by people coming in from Ukraine, Russia, you name it, or some Arab country. But there are also the majority of clubs is suffering, has less income, has serious financial needs. So of course that may well be very attractive for people coming in, well, to actually save the club. And last but not least, it's a cultural thing. Because one of the reasons, of course, why we do not want to dig into it so seriously, why everyone is very reluctant to actually start doing an investigation. The moment you start talking to the national associations or law enforcement, one of the things that always comes up is, yes, of course, to do an investigation you need some indicators, you need some suspicion at least to start an investigation, but in some cases they were there, and even so people were quite hesitant and actually start doing it, and it has to do something with the societal role that football plays in society. Because don't touch the clubs, don't, for the fans, so there is a fear, at least amongst, well, police officers, also public prosecutors. The moment we start digging into and doing serious research and investigation into one specific club, and there is a lot of media attention, it may trigger a lot of debate and aggression, intimidation. So better look the other way. So this is one part of the story. The second one is that you have, being part of a football club is a kind of reward for people also with a criminal background to acquire more status and prestige. So most people always say, why do people commit serious forms of crime? Well, that's an easy question, most people tend to say, because they say, well, because they're interested in the profit. And of course, they are interested in the material profits of committing the crimes, but there's more up to it. Because if it was only about the money, you would start asking questions, why do people continue being part of such a lifestyle? Because a number of them have become very wealthy, very rich. There's no reason whatsoever to continue to be part of a criminal network, but they still do. It's also a form of adrenaline. It's a kind of being addicted to a certain lifestyle, being there, being someone, being taken seriously, and acquiring, because in the end that's what you want also, that people look at you in a respectful way. And one of the things you could do at least is if you start investing a lot of money into one of those clubs, that you acquire some form of status and prestige. I always say to students, when you're interested in to find out what the crossroad looks like between the legitimate and illegitimate world, because again we are always talking about this is the criminal underworld and there is this immaculate upper world where we live in. If you want to see how it mixes up, go to Ajax, to the football club on a regular Sunday afternoon and see who's meeting one another in the VIP boxes. And you will find them all. You will find the lawyers, the accountants, the major firms, but also some alleged and convicted big boys in the drugs world. They will mix up at specific places. We all know at specific hotels and bars, people will find each other, real estate brokers. So it's a place where people come together, and well, the person you see on the picture above is one of he's still, I don't know whether you still know him, by the way, because you are of a younger generation, but it's good old Silvio, famous for a number of things, but he has been convicted as well for serious forms of crime in Italy. He's still, by the way, controlling Milan. So never, despite the fact that he has been convicted for serious fraud offenses, fraud crimes, he's still able, at least, so nobody's actually saying to him, well, you should give it up. And that is of course a fascinating thing, that it allows people still to continue in a specific place, in a specific club, to continue their practices. I also already referred to Carsten Jung. He's really a fascinating story, I would say, because if you start Googling him and look at his background, and he has been involved in serious forms of organized crime, so in Singapore, Hong Kong, indicted with a number of crimes and frauds and money laundering. And he has, as I said, he has been convicted. I think he's still in prison, but nevertheless, his son-in-law and his own son are still controlling the club. They are part of the so he had to step down himself in the end, the moment that he couldn't control the club anymore, and there were the National Association of the English Football Association, the FA, they started in the end an investigation, but that was the moment that he has already been convicted back in his own country, so he was already incarcerated. But still, it shows that it is very hard to control that. And they have in the United Kingdom what they refer to as a fit and proper test, meaning that the FA, the Football Association, can start an investigation, can start looking into who's controlling, who's the owner, who's the manager of the club, what is the background. But still, they didn't do so until he was convicted. Then they said, well, he's now convicted. The fact that his son and son-in-law were still there and have major positions in the executive board, well, that doesn't seem to matter. That is intriguing, I must say, that you still have a form of control of someone who we know of, that all the millions he actually invested in the club are of a very dubious background. And still we seem not to be able to do something about it. And there was some outrage in the newspapers, especially journalists, but in the end the fans of Birmingham City are still dreaming, because what he did, he invested millions, and the only thing they're dreaming of is that they come back to the First League, to the Premier League, and be successful again. Here you see the ambivalence, where actually why we somehow, some respect, end up in a form of what's being referred to as state of denial. Do we want to know? Or do we say, well, we better look the other way? It's, okay, we know it doesn't smell good, but we are not so interested. At the beginning of my presentation, I referred to a wall of silence in relation to Bernie Madoff's case, in relation to Lance Armstrong, because that's what intrigues me as well. Not only, again, looking at individual behavior, but also the environment and how they close ranks, how they are able to keep, well, at least to make it more difficult to get access to relevant information to know what's going on. Which becomes increasingly difficult, as the Panama Papers show, because due to, well, the digital age we're living in, and the messages that are being, well, if you look at all the terabytes of information in the Panama Papers that is being distributed nowadays, it is difficult to keep this wall of silence, to keep it. I think it's more difficult than it was 10 years ago, due to all social media. And the moment you start sending things around, the moment that the walls slowly start to crack, that people start talking, because in many cases it's about people actually who blow the whistle, who start talking. And the moment some people start talking, then the walls start crumbling down. But in many cases, still in different leagues in Europe, I would say people are looking, both the officials, the clubs themselves, the national associations, and law enforcement is looking the other way. They don't want to actually go into it and start a decent investigation. I'm almost there. In criminology we pay some attention, how does it work? Why do we not want to know about it, and what do people come up? This is also about when people are asked about how they were somehow, well, drifted into a form of delinquency, why they started criminal activities. First of all, this is related to those states of denial I was referring to. that, well, think about it yourself. The moment you are considering and doing something which you find, well, morally speaking, dubious, when you have the feeling, okay, I saw, for instance, something that I witnessed something, and I'm not quite sure whether I should confront somebody with this because it may have serious consequences. Then you start thinking about, well, shall I say it or not? And many people, when they decide to keep their mouth shut, they come up with all kinds of, or sometimes afterwards, excuses, legitimizations, or it may, and this is the interesting part for criminology, it's part of the whole decision process, why we do things, why we suddenly, are able, at least, enable ourselves to cross somehow the threshold, because we are all aware of, we know we all have our different standards in terms of what we think is good, morally good or bad, but we are all sometimes confronted with a situation where you actually say, I'm going to do something which I consider to be, morally very dubious or maybe completely wrong, but I do it anyway. And then you come up with all kinds of neutralizations. And you can come up with neutralizations in terms of, well, okay, I've done it, but, well, let's face it, I've done more good in my life than bad, so, well, one exception, so you shouldn't be too hard on me, because this was very exceptional. Or, this is a classic one, by the way, there was a quote of former President Richard Nixon, when he had to step down in the US after the Watergate scandal. He said, well, what I've done may have been illegal, but I'm not a crook, I'm not a criminal. This is fascinating. People do not want to be associated with a criminal. The criminal is the one outside, the one who's dealing drugs, the one who's burglaring houses. But you do not want to have the identity of a criminal. This is something you want to avoid in all forms. So all kinds of processes start, at least to avoid that. The claim of normality. You claim, like I give the example of corruption, this is the way business is being done. This is a regular thing. If I don't do it, you deny responsibility. So you say, listen, I can't change the world, and I do not have the power to change that. This is something that is regularly being done. I was struck myself, we had a parliamentary inquiry in the construction industry 10 years ago in this country, and the most interesting parts we discussed with the students were the hearings, public hearings on television, with the entrepreneurs in the construction industry. And they used all these techniques somehow. They said, listen, this is the way business is being done. Those are the moral codes. If I don't do it, I may object it, but then I'm the only one. So you see a number of things, denial of responsibility, denial of injury, that you say, well, how harmful is it? How harmful is money laundering? Because there's no individual actually suffering. It's just money. So it's relatively acceptable. Denial of victimization. Also that you more or less reverse the accusation and say, who are the ones, everybody's accusing me now of being corrupt or being a crook or being involved, but who are they to criticize me? And very interesting, I always think, is the appeal to higher loyalties. I didn't do it for myself. It was in the club interests or for our national football at a higher level. So you see a number of things, and this is linked up with culture. Somehow people, like the former criminologists who came up with this idea of neutralizations, they said, well, what you see with people, they drift in and out delinquency. And sometimes people go out on what they refer to, I still like the idea, people tend to go out on a moral holiday. So they know what they are doing is not acceptable. They are aware of it, but they come up with justifications. And that might help them just because there is a kind of threshold to do the things. You are inclined to do something which is not acceptable, but you need somebody to push you a little bit, and you can have some help from those neutralizations. Okay, I'm almost at the end. What can we do? We can do a lot. This is also a classic one in criminology, in trying to, the pyramid. It was John Braithwaite from New Zealand who came up. He said, well, it depends on, if we're talking about organizational crime, you have to think about what is the reason why people do not comply with rules and regulations. It may well be that people do not know what the rules and regulations are. Well, in that case, you should give them advice. You should help them. So this is a story about the sticks, the carrots and the sermons. So essentially, you will help people, you will assist them, you will give them some advice and help them try to persuade you have to do better. But slowly, the moment you have the feeling, listen, somebody is not complying with rules and regulations due to the fact that they do not agree with those rules and regulations, that they know about it, but you can do a lot of things. You can increase informal social control, forms of shaming, and in the end, of course, it's a kind of, if you are actually have the feeling, listen, we're dealing with amoral calculators, people who do not give a damn about rules and regulations. The only thing they're interested in are their own wallets, to simplify things a little bit here. So then you might need a criminal case, a prosecution. So it depends. So first of all, look at the reasons, the rationale why people do not comply. So what we see nowadays, of course, this is a metaphor of a pyramid, and it seems to be that you're at the top level, that it's a very vertically oriented approach. I would say nowadays we're talking more about governance rather than government. It's not only about the public, the government who has to do something, it's also about private. Increasingly you see all forms of governance in which private companies themselves are involved as well. So you should use a kind of a mixture of strategies, you can use them all, sermons, sticks, carrots, you name it. But the main thing is, and there is no clear-cut answer to that, a very simple one, but that is the main issue, of course, and maybe you should also look into and confront people and use media and use debates, like with the Panama Papers. Because the good thing about the Panama Papers, I think, we still do not know exactly what's going on, but it has triggered an interesting debate on tax evasion, for instance. How do we think, is that morally acceptable or not? What the whole debate on Starbucks, Facebook, you name it. I think it's intriguing. And it's about cultural, what is acceptable or not. And you have to confront people, and you have to debate, you have to discuss about all kinds of moral issues. And essentially it comes about when you have the feeling that there is a market vice, where it's completely acceptable that there is a kind of code of conduct, well, an unofficial one, that's a regular thing to break the law, like in the construction industry for a while, in the real estate world, and I would say in sports as well, that people easily bend the rules, that you confront them, that you start debating them, that you show them that, well, they should do better, that they should improve their behavior. And that is not